Welcome aboard Imagination Skyway, your grand podcast tour of the magic. I'm your host, Matthew Krull, and in today's episode, we are going to celebrate the upcoming 35th anniversary of Disney's Hollywood Studios by reminiscing about our favorite stories and details from the park, both past and present, over its 35-year history. The theme park opened in 1989 as Disney-MGM Studios and has undergone a tremendous evolution over its nearly 4 decades, resulting in its 2008 name change to Disney's Hollywood Studios, which at the time just marked the beginning of its continued transformation. In this discussion, we'll share some personal anecdotes, some stories about the park's development, and even some Easter eggs and subtle details that make the park one that is loved by Disney fans of all ages. At the end of the show, we'll return to Imagination Central, where I'll share ways in which you can stay connected with Imagination Skyway, how you can discuss this topic with others, and how you can help support and inspire the future of this show. Please remain seated, keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times, and enjoy your grand circle tour aboard Imagination Skyway. It's hard to believe, but in less than a week from when this podcast episode airs, Disney's Hollywood Studios is going to be celebrating its 35th anniversary. Considering the earliest memories I have of this park, it's just incredible to believe that the park has been around for that long. And thinking about my years on the Disney College program and where the park was at that point, it's a park that has aged alongside myself, so it's weird to think about its 35th anniversary, but it gave an excuse at the very least to have a fun conversation about some of the history, details, attractions, things that we love about this park's past and present. And I say we because it's not just going to be having a conversation with you listeners about this park, but I am joined by a friend who's not been on the show before, but who we interact with weekly, if not monthly, if not weekly, for WDW Magazine, which is my good friend Tim Moore. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing great, Matt. I am super excited to be here.
Same here. I mean, we geek out in like comments and emails back and forth about some of the topics we write for the magazine, but you are, I have to say, as I'm gonna give a plug for WDW Magazine here in the beginning, because some listeners, maybe not all listeners, know that I'm a contributor. I do write monthly articles in Imagineering column for the magazine. But one of the things I appreciate is that having you and the other editors on the team has helped to perfect the podcast as well, because your level of commitment to fact checking is second to none. And you're always challenging me to make sure that I am getting the best sources possible, to the point where sometimes if I even have conversations with Imagineers themselves, I have to second guess, is this right? Like, did they factually correct it? Did they cite themselves correctly? But needless to say, it's always fun geeking out with you and trying to like dig into the true story of some of the attractions we love.
Yeah, absolutely. Fact checking is such an important part of the process. And, we're a print magazine, so once it's out there, it's out there. So there's no changing something after the fact. So I always appreciate Matt's stories. They're very well researched, and I appreciate that about you.
Thank you. You see, constant plugs. I'm going to be referencing some of the sources in this episode today, just because I want to do you proud. But before we get to the actual topic, as I like to do with all my new guests, I like to ask some fun questions just to give the listeners a chance to learn a little bit more about you. But because today's episode is so focused on Hollywood Studios, I thought I would craft the questions around the park. And I have 4 for you. And since I haven't personally answered these questions for the listeners either, I'm actually going to answer these questions too. So I want to start by asking, do you remember, or what is your earliest memory of visiting this park?
Very clear memory. It is giant blades of grass as I explored Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set adventure and the giant oatmeal cream pie.
So a very pleasant memory, I would
Oh,
imagine.
absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
funny. I actually have my earliest memories are ones of, I don't want to call it fear, but like uncertainty, because my earliest memory is actually as a young kid, like super, super young, a toddler, riding Catastrophe Canyon and being flipped out by what was happening. And it's weird how some of those earliest memories can hold such a strong impression because as an adult going to ride Catastrophe Canyon, I was a young adult, but as an adult riding Catastrophe Canyon, I still had this anxiety. Not like debilitating. I still enjoyed the ride, but there was always in the back of my mind this uncertainty or this trepidation about wanting to experience the attraction just because as cool as Catastrophe Canyon is and was, I it brought back that early memory of being like fearful of like the fire and this giant wave of water coming towards the tram. It's so weird how some of those early memories can stick with you for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time I saw Cinderella Castle being so overwhelmed by the size of it.
Hmm.
And it's still, I don't have like a fear of large things, but when I approach it, it's still kind of overwhelming in that childhood sense to me.
Yeah, it's crazy how that really all that stuff sticks with you. The only thing that's changed is I used to be terrified of Pirates of the Caribbean, and now it's like my favorite attraction. So
Yeah.
that changed very quickly. All right, number two. This is maybe a hard one. What is your favorite attraction at the park, past or present? If you do want to give both, I'll let you give both.
Okay. This is tough. I cannot there's no way it's not Rise of the Resistance. I'm not even a huge Star Wars guy, but that is just such an immersive attraction from that second you enter that queue. Like every part of it is just so you are in the story. I've never experienced anything else like that in a theme park. But as far as past rides, I great movie ride. It was such a core part of what Hollywood Studios was about, its mission as a park. So there's nothing like it.
I have the exact same answers as you, past and present. So we're in good company.
Yeah.
Three, um, what is your favorite place to eat at the park? And we'll keep this one present.
Okay. ABC Commissary actually has it's like a buffalo chicken grilled cheese, I think. That is my go-to like lunch spot in the park.
ABC Commissary is so underrated, and this for myself included. I always just forget that it's there as often as
Yeah.
I've been to the park and I've eaten there in the past. But yeah, it's just amazing how often I skip over it. But my guilty pleasure at this park is actually Backlot Express, which is nothing really fancy or fun. There's nothing really shiny about that. I love the little tribute to the sort of backlot feeling as if you're literally eating not in a commissary but eating with the crew, having like a lunch break on set. But it's my go-to place for. I've mentioned this before. This park is it activates the 90s kid in me and I just want like chicken nuggets and fries. And so Backlot Express is one of the best places to just go get those chicken nuggets and fries. I got all the condiments there. It's in the setting. It just puts me in that real 90s state of mind. So
Yeah,
that's my
absolutely.
answer. And last one for you is a little bit broader. What is your favorite land or section of the park?
I don't know if this will count. There's nothing like Phantasmic for me. So that entire theater as a space.
We'll make that
Um,
count. The amphitheater. Yeah.
okay, I will leave Magic Kingdom just to go see Phantasmic. That is my favorite nighttime experience more than fireworks in Epcot, Magic Kingdom. I will see it multiple times on a trip. It is just such a cool experience.
That's awesome. The amphitheater is a really cool space, and it was not there, opening day, but it's added such a different dimension to the park, and it's obviously been around for a long time. Mine is even newer. I always feel so like having again grown up in the 90s, it doesn't feel right to not reference one of the original sections of the park, but I always put the objective or subjective state above even my nostalgia. So that being said, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge is my favorite section in this park. I love visiting Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. There are so many details to uncover around every corner. It's incredibly immersive. And I remember the first time visiting it I was fortunate, a friend of mine who was a cast member brought me in for a cast member preview. And when I was there for maybe 30 minutes. And after the first 30 minutes of wandering around Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, I literally, for about 2 to 3 seconds, forgot which park I was in. And that is how immersive that land is. I'm like, wait, was I in Magic Kingdom? Was I no, at Hollywood Studios today? That's right. But at like no other park have I had that experience before of saying like, wait a second, which park am I in? Just because of how maybe different it is from the rest of the park, but also, we'll talk a little bit. I don't want to get too far ahead, but I'm gonna talk about immersive lands, and this really set the bar even higher for immersive land development. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I could walk around in that land and not ride anything, not even get a snack, and just wander around and look. And there's always something new to catch your eye.
yeah, you hear the jets, like you could be standing somewhere and you hear some sort of jet or spacecraft landing on the canopy above you, or flying super fast over overhead. It just makes you look in all different directions. It's just such a cool land. Um, all right, so this, I think it's going to be a fun discussion. I've been looking forward to having this one because I thought about how to approach it. There's so much to talk about with this park. And, I thought, do we go specifically into the history? Do we talk about our favorite details, or do we talk about our favorite attractions? And I thought, why not combine all the above and just have an open chat about celebrating 35 years of this park. Some of our favorite historic stories, some of our favorite details from the past or the present, and attractions from the past or the present, or things we've learned over the years and writing for WDW Magazine, or just celebrating our Disney fandom. So we'll kind of go back and forth, and then maybe if we have similar feelings about something, add to the conversation. But I will let you go first. So of maybe when you were researching or thinking through some of your favorite elements from the past or present of Disney's Hollywood Studios, Disney-MGM Studios, what was one of the first things that came to mind, or the first thing you want to chat about?
Yeah, so I hinted at this in my answer about my first like memory, but I, as a kid, was obsessed with Honey, I Shrunk the Kids movie set adventure. I think it was all of the '90s and into like 2016. Um, Outside of meeting Minnie Moo at Fort Wilderness, like the starkest memory I have of a trip I took in 2000. It was not my first trip, but it was the first trip that I like remember. I went a couple times as like a toddler, and but 2000 was that first trip, and that stands out the most out of all of the parks that were, I guess all four were open at that time. That experience, for some reason, it wasn't huge. It was like 11,000 square foot playground. So that's, nothing. And like if you think of Toy Story Land, it's more than 10 acres. It's a small playground area, but these massive blades of grass, like you could climb atop insects and up webs. There was a Kodak film canister slide, and I thought that was so cool. I was there with my uncle who worked for Kodak at the time, so I was like, "Oh, my uncle's a celebrity. His company's here," and just having that experience of seeing these larger than life super soakers, the Play-Doh, the Tinker Toys, the oatmeal cream pie. It felt almost like a precursor to Toy Story Land, right? Because like you're shrunk down to the size of an ant or a toy in Toy Story Land, and you're just seeing all of these larger than life objects, and it was just really cool.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It was a lot like a precursor to Toy Story Land. It's very similar in that dimension, but obviously, to your point, we're talking about a small footprint relative to the immersive land that is Toy Story
Right.
Land, and how large that is with its 3 attractions and dining and just space to wander and play. But it does bring some of those old Hollywood Studios vibes into the old MGM Studios vibes into the present with Toy Story, and the way in which the Imagineers have come to design lands, which is very interesting. Um, I like
Yeah.
that. Um,
Yeah. I think even if you weren't a fan of the movie, I was obsessed with all of those movies and the TV show. But like I think
yeah,
even if you did not know anything about Wayne Selinsky, like it was just a cool place for kids at least to go play. I've never been there, never went there as an adult with a child of my own, so I don't know from a parent's perspective how fun of an experience that is. But as a kid, that was so cool.
yeah. I think that if you it's one of the best aspects of a land that is based on a piece of intellectual property, whether that be a movie or a show, is if you can go without having seen the film and get the message, then the Imagineers have done their job. Because I think the same is true that I don't know how many people have seen Avatar, but how many people love Avatar
Right.
Flight of Passage? You don't need to be a super fan of that movie to appreciate the land. Same with, you mentioned earlier about Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. You really, I feel like you could take Walt to Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. He had passed for quite a few years before, not that many, but quite a few years before Star Wars came to be. So he has no knowledge of any Star Wars storylines or lore or characters, but you could still take him there, and he would have probably gotten the message. If you've never seen Star Wars, you could still pick up on, okay, these are the bad guys, these are the good guys. This
Yeah.
is roughly what's happening here, and you could get the immersive land that you're being presented with. So, but I really like that answer of Honey I Shrunk the Audience, Honey I Shrunk the Kids playset, and it does tie a little bit into one of the so many different directions I want to go in, but in the spirit of WDW Magazine, thought about this from an article perspective, like almost compiling my notes from either articles I've written or articles that I would write about this. And one of the themes about this park that ties into this idea of the evolution from the Honey I Shrunk the Kids movie set playset days to the Toy Story Land days is that philosophically, this park has shifted its scope, and it literally changed its name in 2008. And even today, none of the 5 opening day attractions are there. It's one of the rare times that a Disney theme park, has none of its opening day attractions left. Which, by the way, for those who are like, what were the original 5? Great Movie Ride. I think a lot of people know. There was the Studio Backlot Tour, Magic of Disney Animation Tour, Monster Sound Show, and Superstar Television. Those were their opening day. None of those are left. But I wanted to learn a little bit more about why the park has changed and the significance of its name change. And a lot of this, I almost think about it in reverse, because a lot of people will say, a lot of Disney fans will say, the it's always MGM Studios to me fan group, which is great because I get it. It's nostalgic. It's a park that you remember, you have fond memories of as a kid, especially if you grew up in the 90s. You were a kid in the 90s. Like that park, from the Honey I Shrunk the Kids playset to the Backlot Tour to the Great Movie Ride. There was just so many, all the shows. Like there's just such a great aspect to this park that made it different from Magic Kingdom and Epcot. But, the partnership with MGM, a lot of that was by necessity. And I think a lot of people don't realize that because we think about it in today's terms. We have so many Disney movies. But back when this park was created, even when it opened in 1989, we'll say that Disney was aware of The Little Mermaid, so we'll count that movie. So if you include The Little Mermaid, there were only 28 films from Disney Animation Studios compared to today, there's 62. This was also before Pixar, which when you add Pixar, that's another 27 films to date. So there are now 89 Disney, just animation, like just Disney animated films compared to the previous 28. We have Marvel, we have Star Wars. There's this rich library of content. And 28 is a lot, but not when you have an entire movie or entire park dedicated to the history of filmmaking. So that required a partnership of some kind, and MGM was the partner to pick, and it had a really rich library of classic films to choose from. And if you just ride the Great Movie Ride, you probably remember what some of those films were. But they had that ability to add to what Disney had and create a true park that's dedicated to the movies. But then I pulled open my Imagineering Field Guide to Disney's Hollywood Studios because this was written in 2010, so it was right after the 2008 name change. And I'm going to pull a direct quote about the philosophical shift that happened at this park. It says another shift had occurred during the intervening years that affect the creative direction of the park and the thought process behind the selection of new attractions. And this shift is reflected in the new name as well. As the public expressed more interest in learning about the world behind the scenes, the media obliged with more and more stories and features about these topics. The arrival of DVD media allowed for the movies we purchase to offer much of the backstage information that the studio's park used to focus on. Our recent projects have focused on more immersive experiences that put the guests in the middle of the action. So the park is now less about the nuts and bolts of filmmaking craft and more about putting guests into experiences inspired by film, television, and other media in new and exciting ways. The name Disney's Hollywood Studios reinforces this shift. So I like that there was an intentionality that follows the trends of viewers, guests wanting to, like, how much they already know about the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, how much do they want to know, and it's shifting. It's like not just about taking you backstage, but taking you into the movies, and that obviously required, in addition to sort of pulling away from MGM, the name change as well. So I like to think about things from that holistic perspective. It's not just about like taking away elements of the park that were loved, but trying to keep the park relevance and keep it evolving. And it still is continuing to evolve. I'm excited to see what they do with it next.
Yeah, it's interesting to think because after they put out that statement, a few years later we got Toy Story Land, and then we got Galaxy's Edge. There's space over by Fantasmic. Like what future immersion could be in store. I do appreciate though that there are still elements of that original park. So there's Indiana Jones. That is one of my favorite experiences, and you still get to have that behind the scenes experience that the early days MGM had. You get to see how those stunts are done. So there are still elements of that early park that I appreciate.
Yeah. And that, to me, like this story was more not focused on a specific period of time, but kind of just looking at the park's evolution throughout its history and using that as a framework to think about the past and the present of the park. So anyway, you gave a great first answer. I'm curious what you have up next on your list.
Let's see. Jump around. We're talking about past and present of the park. Kind of want to talk about Jollywood from last year, and then Osborne from years past. So
That's awesome because I have Osborne on my list too. So this is a great topic.
So I know Jollywood kind of got mixed reviews last year, especially after opening night, which was problematic. But you expect that for a new event. I actually went to one of the events later in the season, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. We sipped cocktails and Hollywood Brown Derby and listened to jazzy Christmas hits and Disney hits. Super cool. I got cocktails and listened to live music outside of Tower of Terror. There were walk-on rides for Star Tours, Rise of the Resistance, Smuggler's Run. I was with a group of 6 total, so we actually, for the first time ever for me, unlocked Chewbacca mode on
That's so cool.
Run. So that was a cool experience. But the shows were absolutely fantastic. Disney Holidays in Hollywood specifically. There was Christmas Bell. Tiana was in it. There was an 8-person jazz band, and then of course Kermit and Miss Piggy, which I think every Gen X and millennial was obsessed with. So they stole the show for me. As much as I loved Jollywood Nights, from Disney leaning into the hardcore Muppets and Nightmare Before Christmas fandoms and special meet and greets, like Duffy was there. Super cool. But nothing for me tops Osborne. I'm going to butcher it. Osborne Family Spectacle of Dancing Lights. I think
you nailed it.
Did I get it? Okay.
You did.
All right.
It's a mouthful of a title, but yeah, Osborne Family Spectacle of Dancing
Osborne.
Lights. Yeah.
Yeah. So I saw it in the early 2000s, which was before it was in the New York area. I can't remember, like Residential. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it was on Residential Street. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I saw it in the early 2000s. I'm a huge Christmas fan. I dragged my husband to at least like half a dozen lights displays each year. Nothing ever lives up. It's like I'm forever chasing the high of Osborne lights in the early 2000s. There were, by the end of it, at least 5 million lights that like captured your entire field of vision, which is insane if you think about the origin of the Osborne lights. So it was started in 1986. Let me look at my notes. A guy named Jennings Osborne who decorated his home to satisfy a request by his daughter, and it was a 1,000 light display, just like 1,000 lights. It grew over the years. He started extending to his neighbor's houses, and eventually it caused traffic problems, and there were lawsuits. So he had to stop doing this light display. That's when Disney scooped it up, and it eventually became this display of 5 million lights, and it was just I talk about immersion. It's not immersion in a film, but it was you were surrounded everywhere you looked by these sparkling Christmas lights, and it was just such a cool experience. Jollywood is great. I don't think it lives up to Osborne quite as much, though.
Yeah, I mean, from a nostalgic perspective, some of the most nostalgic memories I have are from the Disney College program, and because it's really hard for me to look at like how young kids are in the Disney College program now because I did this in 2007 and I just think about how different the park was Disney-MGM Studios back then.
Yeah.
So I have I worked there during the holiday season and at Animal Kingdom, but I spent so much of my time in the evening after work or on the weekends or my weekends, whatever days off I had, going to the park. And especially during the holidays, I was always at Osborne Family Spectacle of Dancing Lights, and just going down Streets of America because it was Streets of America. It was on Streets of America at that time. Stopping at the Writer's Stop to grab a hot chocolate. Right now, that's roughly where Baseline Tap House is, and it happened to be in 2007 a relatively cold winter in November, December. So we're like, he's usually in the 40s or the 50s. So I'd like wear a coat, go with some hot chocolate. It put me in the holiday spirit in Central Florida. So I do have, and in doing like Goofy's Mystery Tour, which is like a cast member event and getting to run around Streets of America. So I do have a lot of fond memories of this area, and the dancing lights are definitely one part of that. Now, if you ask me, Matt, you have the choice of bringing back Streets of America and Dancing Lights or keeping Galaxy's Edge. I'm going to keep Galaxy's Edge. I'm not going to lie. Like I really love Galaxy's Edge, but obviously in a perfect world, we just have everything added, nothing taken away. I know that's the dream. It's not as practical from a business perspective to do that. But like you, Tim, speaking to Jollywood Nights, I was there the first night. I did a 2-part episode about it with Lou Mangello and Kelly Craig, and we talked about, because all three of us were there that opening night. And for an opening night of anything, I always have a very different perspective and a tremendous amount of empathy for those that are running something that's brand new that hasn't been tested. There was no media preview. There was like, how do you rehearse an event like that in a park, except for maybe like trying things out after hours? It's just, you got to do it and then see how it works. And even if you do rehearse it, it's so different with guests. And then the first night of anything, even if it's a repeat event like Flower and Garden Festival, just check the wait times for the booths on the opening day of Flower and Garden Festival versus a typical day. And it varies tremendously because you have tons of content creators going on the first day and making up either, content creators that are large or small. They could have like 100 people following them and still call themselves content creators. And they are like, they're there to get content. So you have all these people that are going to like be the first to get and document everything and go in different directions. They don't know, there's no way of knowing what the event's going to be like when you actually get there. Disney doesn't know exactly how guests are going to flow, but I'm glad because I had predicted in that first episode, I said, look, Disney is going to work out the kinks very quickly. And to the fact that you went on a later date and you had such a great experience speaks to that. So I'm really hoping to keep this tradition alive and bring back Jollywood Nights. I loved that Holidays in Hollywood live stage show too. It brought back such an old school MGM Studios vibe to it as well. That sort of feeling of being at a live recording of a television show that's happening and bringing back that 50s, 60s era was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope they bring it back. It's like an adult version of Mickey's Very Merry.
Yes.
It's still kid friendly, but it definitely is a different kind of experience, and it put me in the holiday mood. So I love my time there. I did want to mention I went to Goofy's Mystery Tour as a reporter for the first time this year. It was at Animal Kingdom, so I think it started at Animal Kingdom. They shifted to Hollywood Studios for a bit. So it's interesting that you How many years did you perform or compete, I
To
guess?
be like, I didn't perform anything. I only did it once. I only did it once, and it was in a later. It wasn't during the college program. It was when I was on my professional internship in 2014. I participated in it. It was so like a giant scavenger hunt with other cast members in a closed off
Yeah.
section of the park. Like it's just such a fun event. And then trivia, a whole trivia competition. It was, I think my team came in 70th out of like 200. I didn't do great, but it was there for
Yeah.
fun. I wasn't there to win the grand prize.
It was a blast. Just like they let me compete alongside cast members just to get the full experience. There's an article coming out in June in the magazine about it. But it was funny. They were talking about how they used to do scantrons for the trivia. I don't know if that was your experience, but
They did.
it's
Yeah, I
all done
used a
on the smart.
Scantron.
Yeah,
It felt like
it's
high
all on
school.
smartphones now. Yeah, but yeah, that's cool that you had that experience.
Yeah, I did want to add one thing about the because I one of my answers was the Osborne family spectacle dancing lights as well.
Yep.
And there were two things that I thought were really interesting in my research. First of all, they didn't always dance. So to your point, when they were on Residential Street, it was just a light display that you would go and see. But they started performing in 2006 thanks to 1,500 dimmer switches that they were able to add. Um, and the reason they even moved it from Residential Street, which of course Residential Street wasn't there, was because that's where Lights Motors Action went up in 2005. So they took that down in 2004, and then they moved it to 2006 to the Streets of America. And the second, sorry, two more things. Second is its final performance. I wasn't there, but its final performance was January 3rd, 2016, and its final dance was to the Mickey Mouse Club, which was such a fun way to sort of like finish its run. And in case those, because sometimes we miss things that we remember fondly, but it's good to know this last fact, which is that the majority of those lights were donated to the Give the Kids the World Village, and so you can technically still go and see them for their Night of Million Lights holiday events. But for me, I feel so good knowing that's going to such a great cause, and
Yeah.
it really puts at peace for me. Like I don't want it back. Keep it at Give the Kids the World Village. Just keep it there. Let it run there as long as possible. Add to it. It just feels so good knowing that it's living on and doing such a great thing for the world. So, a few fun facts I wanted to add to that discussion. Do I stick with nostalgia? All right, I am. We spoke about WDW magazine articles, and I'm trying not to plug it too heavily in this episode. I promise this is not just a sales pitch for the magazine, but these are literal things that Tim and I have written about. And if you like hearing these stories in more depth and lots more, it's definitely worth subscribing to the magazine, even if it's just the digital version. The print version is gorgeous. I love getting the print version, but even if you just want to kind of go through the backlog of old articles and new ones to start with the e-subscription. But the one of the things I recently wrote, and is this out yet? I should actually check to see if this is. Oh, it's out next month, so this is like perfect timing. It's out for the 35th anniversary of Hollywood Studios, which is talking about the way in which the park is designed. And I'm only going to focus on the elements of this that are well documented in, again, the Imagineering Field Guide. I love the Imagineering Field Guides. I reference them. Tim knows how many times I'm like, Imagineering Field Guide. That's source, Imagineering Field Guide, Imagineering Field Guide, Imagineering Field Guide. It also makes me feel good that, like, all right, I know this fact is probably true. It's written by the Imagineers, but all this information comes from the Imagineering Field Guide. So I'm gonna put this out there. But we know that Michael Eisner and the team kind of positioned the park when it was MGM Studios as the Hollywood that never was and always will be. I kind of interpret that as meaning that the park is a caricature of Hollywood. It's not a literal representation of Hollywood. It's what we imagine in our minds the past and the present of Hollywood is. And so there are 3 sections that are properly documented as being clearly tied to specific eras in Hollywood history. And the first is Hollywood Boulevard represents the golden age of Hollywood in the 1930s. And it's designed in such a way, even today, that the appearance of the buildings, they do not draw from, it's not drawing from, yes, Hollywood Boulevard's a real place, but it's not like they picked up Hollywood Boulevard, you know, copied it and just pasted it or dropped it onto the park. They really are blending this feeling of Hollywood in the 1930s and giving it this shiny, bright, glowing appearance because they want it to feel hopeful, because Hollywood was a beacon of hope in the 1930s. This was during the Great Depression. This was the start of the wartime, and or like the world had started to go to war. So America needed something to, and the world needed something to bring it hope. And Hollywood was growing at the time. It represented economic prosperity. It represented from the films like things that we can hope for and long for and be inspired by. And so Hollywood Boulevard maintains that small town charm, but this is just the start of something wonderful. This is like a hopeful place, and it is tying to that golden age of Hollywood. And the music represents that too. And then you move down the corner to a later expansion. It was not there on opening day, but Sunset Boulevard is a decade further and represents the 1940s. And this is during an era of wartime. It was a wartime era and an era of expansion. So the wartime is represented by literal things like Rosie's All American Cafe. It's literally representing Rosie the Riveter. You have all these references to World War II. And then if you look at the architecture and the way that the street is designed, it's a much broader street than Hollywood Boulevard. And the architecture is more varied. It's not just a simplified version of Hollywood, but there's all these different references to different architectural styles that were represented in Hollywood in the 1940s, because Hollywood had boomed. It had expanded maybe almost too quickly, especially for the wartime. Disney itself even went through some troublesome times in the 1940s when Walt's animators were sent off to the war. There was not as much production happening. So you get that little bit more of an aged style to it. And then, of course, the foreboding nature of the Hollywood Tower Hotel also adds to that feeling of like, this is still Hollywood, but maybe not such a great time compared to the 1930s. And then the last of the three that, again, is well documented in this field guide is Echo Lake. And this is taking us a decade ahead to the 1950s, where we had the rise of television. That's why we've got 50s primetime Inn and Cafe. We had the rise of California crazy roadside attractions, and that's represented by Gertie, who represents that sort of part of the culture, and was a sort of nod to a 1914 animated short called Gertie the Dinosaur. But all of the architecture here is speaking more to suburbia in the 1950s from a real location, Echo Lake, that was actually the hub of the film industry during the Silent Age. So it's interesting how, looking at those three aspects of the park they've evolved, but they're very much similar to the way they were on opening day. They still tie to that 1930s, 1940s, 1950s history of Hollywood, but they're not, while they are inspired by real places, and yes, like the Grumman's Chinese Theater is pretty much a near replica. The Hollywood Brown Derby is pretty much a near replica of those real locations. But otherwise, these are just drawing from inspiration of like what people imagine in their minds Hollywood is like during those eras. And more importantly, the tone that was set in those eras and what it did for American culture. So those are still there, and they're still great, sort of nods to the history of the real place and ties to the origins of the park.
Yeah, I think it speaks to what you were talking about earlier too. Like the early days, MGM Studios was very much about that experience of behind the scenes, seeing Hollywood, and now the expansions of the park, Toy Story Land and Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. Those aren't based on eras in Hollywood, but are taking us into those immersive lands instead.
Yeah. So what do you have up next?
Well, you started alluding to Hollywood Tower Hotel, and Tower of Terror is my favorite ride. Across, I guess the two, if I'm at Disneyland or Walt Disney World, like my favorite thrill ride. So it's not Tower of Terror at Disneyland anymore, Disney California Adventure. It's the Guardians retheme, which As much as I love the Tower of Terror backstory, I wouldn't be sad to see come to Hollywood Studios someday. Um, but
And maybe it will.
yeah, I remember the first time I rode this. It was a big extended family trip. My grandparents used to live at Disney World for 3 to 6 months a year. They would camp at Fort Wilderness. They had discounts for seniors. They could get like a campsite for like $27 a night. So they would literally spend months. So they, for a week, invited, all of their kids and grandkids down. And so I was there with multiple uncles, aunts, cousins, my family. And so my grandparents were the only ones who had ridden Tower of Terror before. They knew what was going to happen. None of the rest of us did. Altogether, we filled up like 12 or 13 seats. I think there's 21, if I'm counting correctly, on the elevator. So we made up the bulk of this ride. And it was horrifying the first time, but I remember getting off and going to look at the picture. It is just a bunch of people like white knuckled holding on for dear life, and then my two grandparents with their hands in the air because they'd ridden it so many times, like they loved it. They were big thrill seekers. So just seeing the horror on everyone's faces as they experienced it, and my grandparents laughing with their hands in the air, like that sticks with me. I think of how magical Disney is for people across generations. I think of that photo. Um, and yeah, I just that's such a magical memory for me. And we're celebrating 35 years of Hollywood Studios in May, but it's actually this July is the 30th anniversary of Tower of Terror.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, so I was actually just reading through an old fact sheet about it from Disney in preparation for a piece, and it was about the construction of the tower, and it's pretty impressive. It's 1,500 tons of steel and then almost 146,000 cubic feet of concrete to build that tower. And the finished project or product has 27,000 roof tiles on it. So this is a massive building, and it was cool to learn about the construction of it.
Yeah, it's one of the masterclass Imagineering attractions still to this day. It was designed with such storytelling brilliance, and it really comes down to storytelling. The engineering side of it is really impressive too, but it's the storytelling of this attraction that makes it so great. And I have Tower of Terror listed on my list as well as one of the things worth discussing. I'm gonna give a diluted version of this, but the or paraphrase version of this because again, I sort of pulled the direct quote from not the Imagineering Field Guide, but the I have another book which was much older. It was written in 1996, so this is when Tower of Terror was only a couple of years old. But it's the Walt Disney Imagineering: A Behind the Dreams Look at Making the Magic Real book. Still has some great facts, just a little bit outdated, just about by 20 years or so. But the more than 20 years, actually, almost 30 years. So the thing I love about this is that when they were coming up with the concept for this, like runaway elevator thrill ride, they actually went to they meaning the Imagineers went to Otis Elevator Company and tried to bring them on as consultants to help them to come up with this elevator design. So Otis was so excited, and they said the executive said, like, look, we're going to bring you to this new high-rise building in Los Angeles. We just completed installation of our fastest generation elevator. So Imagineers were super excited to try this. They go to the top, and then they go down. How many? I think it was like 50 something floors. They went to the 50th floor. They went to the 50th floor, and then they were going to see what it felt like to drop down on the fastest elevator Otis had developed from the 50th floor down to the ground floor. And they adjusted the elevator to full speed. And the team did find themselves, they were like quickly on the ground floor, right? They got there super fast. But they got off the elevator, and the executive, who was super excited, was like, so what'd you think? And the Imagineers were like, it's fast, all right. But what we were really looking for is a gut-wrenching, hair-raising, free-falling thrill. And to that, I'm gonna read the direct quote from the book. To that, the surprised executive responded, "What? And undo everything we've been trying to perfect for more than a century? Our success comes when you feel like you're not moving at all." So I love that they're like, we're gonna ride the fastest elevator that's out there, but Otis which honestly makes more sense. You want to design something that for a regular everyday person and a normal skyrise, they don't want to feel like they're dropping through a skyscraper. They want to feel like they're just, they don't almost want to feel nothing. Like I'm on the 50th floor, now I'm on the ground floor, and it was really fast. So the Imagineers figured out, like, look, we need to totally start from scratch and come up with not just a free fall ride, but a drop ride that drops you at a greater acceleration than gravity. So that's why, like, you really get that pull down feeling as you're riding it, because you're not just free falling, you're literally being pulled down to the ground level of the attraction, or in modern iterations of it, varying speeds and levels of
Yeah.
height difference. So
Yeah, one of my favorite stories about Tower of Terror actually I learned from you. And it's about how, it used to just be that one iteration. And it was Imagineer Theron Skis
yep.
you spoke with. And so in the early days, he had heard repeat visitors like counting down to the moment the drop was going to happen. And so there was no element of surprise for those who were, around those guests. So that inspired him to introduce different ride profiles, including the one that shoots you up. And I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, I love that story from Theron. It's like he's going to surprise the people who try to surprise their friends the first time they ride it. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, Tower of Terror is definitely a cool story. Well, I'm gonna go around the corner then, I guess, to Rock and Roller Coaster, because that presents another great aspect of Disney history and another great element for the park. I've talked about this on the podcast before, but Rock and Roller Coaster's backstory is actually tied to Tower of Terror's backstory, and I can't really find a lot of documentation to support this, but I'm trying to remember, because I tried to remember where I first read this or heard this, but I've heard it from multiple sources that uh, GeForce Records, like, was like, went on hard times around the time that the Hollywood Tower Hotel had experienced its incidents, and this was during an era that also, like, 1940s wartime, not a great time in Hollywood history. But then once the Hollywood Tower Hotel started welcoming back guests, GeForce Records saw an opportunity to revive its label. It had just signed on Aerosmith, and it decided that to attract more potential buyers of their albums, would open up tours and advertise that, so people staying at the Hollywood Tower Hotel could just go around the corner, across the courtyard, and visit GeForce Records. It's that sort of like the tie-in to the lore of Sunset Boulevard and the Hollywood Tower Hotel. But the thing I do know, which is from Imagineer Tom K. Morris, who I've spoken with and interviewed on the show, that the idea for Rock and Roller Coaster started with him, like, over 20 years before Rock and Roller Coaster was around, because back in the early days when he would go to Disneyland, or working at Disneyland, so we're driving back and forth before he was even an Imagineer. He talked about how there was this stretch on Jamboree Road where he'd sort of reach the top and you'd see the harbor and the ocean, and he would bring a tape deck in the car with him and try to time some rock and roll music to that particular aspect. And that helped him come up with this dream for synchronized sound. And eventually he's hired as an Imagineer. He goes to Walt Disney World. He continues to test. And he goes back to Disneyland and starts helping to develop the first synchronized onboard soundtrack for Space Mountain. Unfortunately, the technology just wasn't there yet. There needed to be elasticity in the timing, because on roller coasters, the timing can vary by quite a bit depending on the weight of the car, the time of the day, the heat, the humidity. So you can have a really fast rocket or a really slow rocket, relatively speaking. So it could be off by several seconds from one rocket to the next. So you needed that elasticity that happens on modern day synchronized roller coasters. So fortunately, fellow Imagineer of his did develop the first synchronized onboard soundtrack for Space Mountain de la Terre à la Lune for Disneyland Paris, which opened in 1995. And then they did bring soundtrack to Space Mountain Disneyland in 1996. But come full circle, while Tom did not get to work on Rock and Roller Coaster, Imagineers Kathy Mangum and Paul Osterhout did develop Rock and Roller Coaster in 1999, which did feature a synchronized onboard soundtrack. Um, and so it was this sort of dream of synchronized sound. It reminds me so much of Walt's dream for synchronized sound with Steamboat Willie, just like the technology wasn't there yet. And then he finally figured it out and was able to bring synchronized sound to animation. And now Imagineers are able to bring synchronized sounds um, to attractions, to roller coasters. So Rock and Roller Coaster is just like such a cool story of just one Imagineer with this idea in the 1970s that eventually came to be in 1999. And it was literally like a how do I bring rock and roll soundtracks to a thrilling attraction? And here you go. And each train on Rock and Roller Coaster, which is just so impressive, has 125 speakers. Each train has 125 speakers and 24 subwoofers. It is just a powerhouse of rock and roll sound. So that's why even just listening to it from the queue in that load area, it has such rich sound to it. And then, of course, being on board, you were just surrounded by rock and roll. So it's just such a cool attraction.
Yeah, speaking of rock and roll, I went digging for some quotes from Steven Tyler back when the ride came out. I found this quote he gave to the Orlando Sentinel in '99. So he said, "I don't think Walt Disney had this or us in mind when he was drawing Pants on the Mouse, but a roller coaster is so radical, and rock and roll being the devil's music, it's a perfect match." I just love
Steven
that.
Tyler loves Rock and Roller Coaster.
He's obsessed with the fact that there is a coaster about his music. It's great.
Yeah. I love catching some, like sometimes people will post. I haven't seen one post in a long time. I don't know if he's been there in a long time, but back in the day, you'd see like even before Instagram stories, someone would post a short YouTube video of like catching Steven Tyler being escorted from backstage in the gift shop to the limo car in the unload area, and then riding and just being escorted out just because he loves the
Yeah.
attraction.
It's an
Um,
interesting in that too, because
yeah,
I feel like back when there was more like an operating animation studio and a studio in Hollywood studios, there was more of a chance to see celebrities in the park. We spoke with someone who was a cast member in the '90s, and she remembers seeing Tom Hanks working in the park, and the strict guidelines for cast members was do not interrupt the actors, don't approach them. And she says to this day she regrets not saying hi to Tom Hanks because he would have been super nice about it. But there were three animated films fully produced there, right? It was Mulan, Lilo and Stitch, and Brother Bear.
yeah.
Yeah, so like it's just cool that there were these opportunities for celebrities to be in the parks, not just as guests, but actually working there.
It is really interesting that we had that. Um, it was a working studio like that. It literally was a working studio for a period of time in its early days, and then even Mulan, the Brother Bear, early Lilo and Stitch, those are all late '90s, early 2000s. So for quite a while, it was the home of production, and it really did blend. Like it wasn't just fake backstage; it was real backstage too. For some film productions, and wasn't I think the modern version of the Mickey Mouse Club, the revived version with like Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera and Ryan Gosling, like that was
Yep.
filmed there. And there's something else that they sometimes filmed shows in the backlot that they really did use it as an actual studio for a number of years.
Yeah, so the magic of Disney animation, I found out that the animators would use like guests who walk by to inspire their animation. So this is I'm pulling this directly from the May issue. One of our editors, Heather, wrote this. She said, making Lilo and Stitch inside an animation studio that was a working attraction turned out to be quite helpful for the animators. They could draw inspiration from guests who passed by their windows daily, and they worked them into the film as Lilo's photography subjects. Phil Boyd, cleanup supervisor for the movie, told the Orlando Sentinel that every tourist seen on screen was someone who passed by the windows of the magic of Disney animation.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, people who visited in the late '90s, early 2000s could have an animated character and not even know
Yeah. I was in Mulan. I'm gonna look up. Do I see myself as a
it.
kid?
Yeah.
passing
Yeah.
by. Maybe I was drawn as one of the warriors alongside Mulan or
Yeah.
something. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, man, I'm trying to think about where I want to go next. I have a few things left. Let's talk about the Great Movie Ride, because this does tie very much into the history of the park as well. So I think it's some Disney fans know this. I don't know how many Disney fans know this. It is something that's mentioned. If you're looking into the history, it's easy to find this. But um, originally, the Great Movie Ride was going to be a pavilion at Epcot, which before there was a concept of a uh, a park, a movie studio park. Now, this was partially, I will say, this is not documented in the Imagineering books that I have, but it involves more of the business side. This was partially kicked into gear because Universal announced they were going to be building Universal Studios Orlando um, around that same time. So that really not only changed the game for Orlando, but also changed the scope of creating an Epcot pavilion to no, we need to think about building a similar park. And I think while Universal Studios got the it's ironic just given the sentiment sometimes you see on social media today. Universal took longer to develop Universal Studios Florida than Disney took to develop Disney-MGM Studios because they were reacting to Universal building a park, but opened first. So MGM opened on May 1st, 1989, or Disney MGM Studios opened May 1st, 1989, and Universal Studios opened June 7th, 1990, over a year later. But I'm going to pull a direct segment from the Walt Disney Imagineering book, a Behind the Dreams Look at at Making the Magic Real. Again, it's from 1996, so still knew the history. So here's the quote. Not long after Michael Eisner became chief executive officer of the Walt Disney Company, he began to spend a lot of time at Imagineering, quote, immersing himself in all the lunacy and free thinking, end quote. Being an idea man himself, not to mention a big kid at heart, he fit right in. Among the first concepts he encountered was an idea sparked by Marty Sklar and Randy Bright, then Imagineering creative executives, for a Hollywood studio-themed entertainment pavilion at Epcot. The concept featured a ride that would take guests on a journey into the magic of the movies, literally. As a team of Imagineers began to develop the ride concept, its rich theme prompted several offshoot ideas. It soon became apparent to Michael that this great movie ride concept should be expanded in its design to a scale even more grand than an Epcot pavilion. The Imagineers came up with a solution, and the great movie ride was indeed built, surrounded by the 45-acre Disney MGM Studios. So I thought it was just so cool that the Great Movie Ride, you have an idea for an attraction for another park, and then you start thinking about what other possibilities are here and discovering that you've got an entire park. It would be very similar to the Imagineers saying, we want to build a safari attraction for Magic Kingdom or for Epcot, we'll build a pavilion that's dedicated to name an African country or section of Africa. We're going to probably be Kenya or Tanzania based on the inspiration for Kilimanjaro safaris. We're going to build a Kenya pavilion and we're going to have a safari attraction. Start thinking of other ideas and then whoop, you've got Disney's Animal Kingdom. Of course, that's not what happened, but that would be a direct analogy to what they did with Disney MGM Studios. And while, so I know there's a lot of feelings in both directions about replacing the Great Movie Ride with Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. I love the fact that we are actually taking a step even further back in history by developing the first ride-through attraction for Mickey Mouse, which is such a great successor to the attraction to have something like that. And obviously, it's drawn so many crowds, and it's great for kids of all ages. Everyone knows Mickey Mouse. Every culture knows Mickey Mouse. It's just such a strong fit to tie that and ground that park and its new evolution and direction we've talked about. But, when you think about the Great Movie Ride, not only was it complicated in the sense that there were so many MGM films in there, Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, Tarzan, not the animated version, but the live action version, the classic version. The list just goes on and on. But the thing that I always found shocking, so the ride closed down in 2017. The newest film, and I'm not counting the montage that was easy to replace, the ride scenes, the newest movie featured in the Great Movie Ride in 2017 was Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was at the time over 35 years old. So the newest attraction in 2017, the newest movie featured in a ride scene, not the montage, in that attraction was over 35 years old when it closed. And especially for kids, they would get some of the films in the montage. They would maybe some of them know like Wizard of Oz or Mary Poppins, of course. But I don't know about Footlight Parade or Public Enemy or maybe Alien. I don't know. like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like there's just so much in there that I'm sure just went right over kids' heads.
Yeah.
And it could help them to build. I think that's sort of the argument. It's like it could help them to build that appreciation for film history. Absolutely true. But it just made sense to change it and to renovate it with new ride scenes would have just been so costly to do that as well. Anyway, so I still think the history of that attraction is so interesting.
I didn't think about this when you were mentioning Catastrophe Canyon earlier, but the Wicked Witch was what was horrifying for me as a child, that
So
experiencing as an
scary.
adult. Yeah, I mean, the still when I watch the movie and she flies by when the house is in the tornado, like that's still horrifying to me. But seeing that animatronic, which was a really cool animatronic, seeing that as a child was terrifying.
And that was the first A100 animatronic that was ever
Yes.
featured in the Disney parks. So it had
Yeah.
a piece of history to it as well. One of the I heard this once from this is absolutely not true, but it would just be so cool if it was. Someone said to me, I can't remember who said this to me, but they had this. I love fan theories because fan theories are just so much fun. They had a fan theory that Kylo Ren in Rise of the Resistance was the Wicked Witch, the same figure, just repurposed
Yeah.
with a new costume because he moves very similarly. It's not true, but it's just such a little fun theory. Like, could you imagine if they took the Wicked Witch animatronic and repurposed her as Kylo Ren for Star Wars: Rise of the Resistance? Similar characters, similar climactic moments, similar movements. It just would have been very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimate Easter egg.
Yes, that would have been, and no one would have known it. Like you'd have to have like uh, these crazy boards with on your wall to try to tie everything together.
Um,
I,
I did. Oh,
yeah,
good. One more thing about that attraction was just I think there are a few attractions within Walt Disney World that are so like cast member centric. So you've got Jungle Cruise, Kilimanjaro Safaris, and Great Movie Ride was one of those, and it was just I spoke with a cast member who was a tour guide, and I didn't even think about it. She had to memorize multiple scripts depending on like which if it's the bank robber or the gangster. And it was just such a tight knit community among those cast members. She said that the cast member who trained her, they called them, the parents, mom and dad. She got them a like a Mother's Day and Father's Day mug to say thank you for training me. It felt like such a group, a family group of cast members, and I think that kind of camaraderie exists on just a few attractions. And Great Movie Ride was definitely one of those.
yeah. It's any attraction. I should. It's actually this could be a good topic for a podcast episode talking about attractions that have a high level of cast member interaction or where the cast members really like the attraction couldn't exist without cast members. And I don't just mean that from an operational perspective, but a storytelling perspective, because obviously no attraction could exist without cast members from an operational perspective. But you're right. Great Movie Ride was one of those examples, and certainly a high spiel role that at the time I'm sure I know I was back in the Disney College program marked off to take on a high spiel role on an attraction, and I feel like I could have been positioned at Great Movie Ride. I'm very grateful I was positioned at Kilimanjaro Safaris because I cannot act. So I would have felt so bad. I can act to the extent I needed to for Kilimanjaro Safaris, which was really just
Right.
about building excitement and surprise. Like, oh, I didn't know this bridge was going to collapse. Like that. That's about the
Yeah.
extent of the acting I had to get to. Or pretending that there were poachers, but like that was it. Otherwise, Great Movie Ride was true. Like these were actors that were performing and
Yeah.
putting on performances, especially for the gangster role or the cowboy or cowgirl role. the not the the bank robber role
Yeah.
would have been it would have been really hard for me to do that. So I'm grateful I didn't get positioned there. Uh, so I only have one thing left that is actually kind of a small thing. It's a little anticlimactic, but I want to make sure we get to whatever else you have as well. But maybe we'll pick out a couple of other things. So I'll go to you to pick out maybe a penultimate uh, item on your list.
Yeah, I'll go with the short one. You kind of alluded to it earlier when you talked about the writer's stop. I love Baseline Tap House. It is such a cool spot, and I feel like as an annual pass holder, I can take the time. I'm not running from ride to ride. I can actually just stop and have a beer and relax and people watch. So if you're there for a once in a decade trip, I understand running around with Genie Plus and trying to get everything. But if you can like take a step back and just relax, Baseline for me is the place to do it. So I do miss the Writer Stop. It was like a combination bookstore, coffee shop, very cool. But Baseline has California craft beers. You can get a flight if you want to try multiple beers. They also have, I believe, cider, and like you can even get pre-made cocktails. They might have a full bar, but I go with craft beer there. But it's a good place to sit, like if you are waiting for your reservation at Sci-Fi, or if you're waiting for your entry for Lightning Lane. But I love they have this huge tree outside. It's great shade in the summer. And then the strung lights at night, it's such a cool vibe. I think a lot of people run right past it on their way to Galaxy's Edge. But if you have the time to stop and relax on a DHS day, that's the spot to do it. And their charcuterie board is very good.
Yeah, I haven't admittedly been there in a long time. I definitely remember spending some time there, and the first thing I thought when they opened it was, to your point, this is brilliant for people waiting for sci-fi, because sometimes you do sit there for a little while because it is a very popular place and they have a high turnover but a high demand as well. So you could be waiting for your table with a reservation for 15, 20 minutes. So you could just hop on over, and if you enjoy a good glass of beer or something, you just hop on over, grab a drink, and then when your table's ready, you head on into the restaurant. But it it really did add a different element, and it's literally positioned as the corner between old and new, for Hollywood studios. Old being ABC Commissary, and the part of the old Backlot, which is now part of Echo Lake, and the commissary is a blending between the two, where Star Tours is. But yeah, that whole edition of Grand Avenue still has some elements there of Streets of America, so you could still see some of the old Streets of America there. But it actually took on, which is also really cool when it ties back to and I don't think I wrote this in the article because it was a little bit too, we talk about fact checking like this. I had to draw a little bit too many conclusions on this one, but it actually draws a lot of inspiration from like more downtown Los Angeles. And the music that's played there is funk music. So we're actually going from like up to like 1970s era in Hollywood. And a totally different, like more modern Los Angeles vibe or modern Hollywood vibe that now brings us into the immersive lands that are Star Wars Galaxy's Edge right around the corner. Muppets Courtyard, which is now, still kind of part of Grand Avenue, ties into Grand Avenue a little bit more. But anyway, long story short, Baseline Tap House, great answer, and a place I need to get to again very soon. I might prioritize that on my next solo trip.
Yeah, it's a great spot for solo trips. If I'm down there quite a bit by myself, and I love to sit there.
Yeah. The last thing actually I have is right across the way. So it is Muppets Courtyard, and specifically Muppet Vision 3D, because this does tie into, first of all, it's one of my favorite attractions, period. Excuse me. But also, it does tie into the history of the park and the history of the company, because it was one of the things that people might not realize was this was Jim Henson's last film project. He actually passed during the production of Muppet Vision 3D, and I think it was Brian Henson who took over leadership of it, and then Frank Oz, I think it was another one who kind of stepped up to help with putting the pieces together for Muppet Vision 3D. But this was the last piece. We think about like Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion as sort of being the last attractions, except maybe arguably Space Mountain, that Walt had a hand in developments. Pirates literally was the last one he had like he saw models for and helped come up with like he rideed the test vehicle, like tested the ride vehicle. So that very similar to here, Jim Henson being really strongly tied to this attraction, sort of being that last film project he worked on. It did open in 1991. Um, and it was prior to Disney's acquisition of the Muppets, which was 2004, but it really proved out such a strong partnership between Disney and the Muppets, much like Star Tours was a great way, and the Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular and Indiana Jones Adventure proved out the relationship between Disney and Lucasfilm that eventually led to that acquisition. So this was a good test for the partnership between Disney and the Muppets that led to Disney acquiring them in 2004. But one of the things I love is that so many people just first of all, they either pass by it and don't experience it, which to me is like, look, go experience this attraction. It is just such a fun, family friendly. I think I've experienced this attraction, no joke, 100 times. It never gets old. I just love this attraction. But the pre-show, just to give you a reason to go, is loaded with Easter eggs in that room. And some of my favorites, and one of these definitely goes over most people's heads and definitely went over mine for the majority of my life, which is if you look up, there is a net full of Jello, which is a Easter egg for Annette Funicello, who is one of the.
Oh gosh.
Yep, it's a net full of Jello. If you say it fast enough, it's Annette Funicello, one of the members of the Mickey Mouse Club in the early days. There is a box of 2D Fruities, which is a nod to Little Richard's Tutti Frutti. Closer to Disney and Muppets, there are a lot of posters for Muppet attractions. Muppet versions of movies, Disney movies. So one of my favorites is there's a large poster of Tron, which is not Tron, it's Prawn with Pepe, the King Prawn. And it's just like in a very Tron-esque aesthetic. So it's just very, very funny. I think there's Star Tours instead of Star Wars with Miss Piggy. It's just so much fun. And then one of my favorites, especially because this ties back to this being Jim Henson's last film project, if you look up in the rafters, there is a photo of Jim Henson as a Muppet looking down at the guests passing by. So you can sort of pass by a little nod to Jim Henson himself in the pre-show. But for me, it's an underappreciated attraction that I'm so grateful is still here at the park 33 years later. And I only hope continues to maintain its popularity because Muppets are such a great addition to parks. I feel like there almost should be a little bit more sometimes in the parks. I love when they add these little pop-up attractions like they did with Liberty Square. And so it's a great attraction. I hope it sticks around for a while.
More Muppets, I agree. I might have learned this from your podcast. I'm trying to remember where I originally heard it. But I know Jack Lindquist at Disneyland, when they were first talking about acquiring the Muppets in like the late 80s, early 90s, wanted to temporarily turn Disneyland into Kermit Land. And he was going to paint the Matterhorn green. Miss Piggy was going to replace Cleopatra in Small World. Like it was going to be this multi-month marketing promo to get people to return to Disneyland who might have been there, quite a bit. Didn't happen. I think Jim Henson's death played a part in that. But I always advocate for more Muppets, whatever Disney park it is.
Yeah. Well, that exhausted my list. I know you said it had two more, so that means you have one more. So what is the last item on your list?
Well, you mentioned at the start of this kind of growing up with Hollywood Studios or MGM Studios to start with. Something I grew up with was Toy Story. The first movie came out when I was around 6. And literally the year I went off to college is when the third film came out when Andy went off to college. So it just felt kind of kismet. Like I grew up alongside Andy. So I want to talk about Toy Story Land.
Yeah.
The emotional experience the first time I stepped into that land. It was, I don't think I've been so moved. Pixar Pier at Disney California Adventure kind of had the same impact for me because Pixar, became very popular as I was coming of age. So just those experiences have been really cool. But Toy Story Land, it's just such an immersive place, like the idea of being shrunk down to the size of a toy. And you really notice it in the details when you sit on a wheel of Baby Bell cheese or a popsicle stick bench. Um, One thing I don't like about Toy Story Land is there's not a lot of trees, so there's not a lot of good shade in Toy Story Land, but that's because, a regular sized tree, if you're the size of a toy, would look out of place. But it is just such a cool place to walk through, even if you're not gonna stop and ride anything. Uh, I'm a huge coaster junkie. I live in Ohio, so I'm very close to Cedar Point and Kings Island. We have these massive roller coasters. So Slinky Dog Dash doesn't have the same appeal for me, especially with the wait time that it commands. But in terms of like an immersive roller coaster for kids, that is such a cool experience. And there's so many Easter eggs, similar to the Muppet pre-show. There's so many Easter eggs littered throughout Toy Story Land. My favorite is if you go through Slinky Dog Dash, like the entry to the queue, and you look back up at the wait time, it's Buster's name tag or his ID tag, and it has Andy's ad. I don't remember what the address is, but it has Andy's address on it. And then there's, like you can see Rex's toy box with has an 11 and a 22 on it, and then the price is 1995 for a nod to November 22nd, 1995 when the film came out. So there's just all these cool nods throughout the land that I like to experience.
Yeah, there's so much in Toy Story Land I haven't even like uncovered that it's just riddled with Easter eggs. And so it's definitely a fun land to run around. And the older Maggie gets, the more she loves running around Toy Story Land too. And, getting to see, I'm excited for her. I did show her from the queue. I think it was the only place we could see it from, the queue of alien swirling saucers. She caught a glimpse of the Wheezy animatronic at the end of Slinky Dog Dash because she's not tall
Yeah.
enough to ride it. But I'm like, look, there's Wheezy. And then, of course, she passes the giant Woody and um, but giant Buzz and Rex and all the characters that are just larger than life. Loves eating at Roundup Rodeo Barbecue as much as Joanna and myself do. So, at Toy Story Land is just such a great addition to the park, and
Yeah.
that took up backlot space. So, didn't take anything away from us. Just more fun added to the park.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been just such a fun uh, non-specific sort of discussion, which sometimes we need something like that. Just a fun, casual conversation about the things we love about this park, its past, its present, its history. And we've referenced so many times how many stories we've written in WDW Magazine about Hollywood studios. And like I said, there were like three things I mentioned that have come up in articles I've written. I've only been writing for the magazine for like 2 or 3 years now. So that's not that many articles I've written, and that just shows how much there is to talk about with this park. But I just want to make sure we plug WDW Magazine, all the places to go, and we have a new promo code. Thanks to you, Tim, for helping to get that going. For 15% off of your subscription, which is awesome. You just have to use the code Skyway for 15% off the shop. So where can people go?
Yeah.
What should they consider?
So we have it's a monthly magazine. We have print and digital, as Matt alluded to. And if you go the digital route, you'll get access to all of our past issues. So you can pull up all of Matt's great stories as well. But it's a beautiful print magazine. Once a month, there's always a unique theme. So this month's issue was all about the elements. So water, air, fire, and I'm forgetting the last one. Um,
Earth.
or thank you. Yes, I did
That
a
was
whole.
I wrote about Earth. That's how I had
Yeah.
to
Okay.
remember.
Perfect. So that one's available as it'll be available to order as a back issue soon. But next month's issue, in honor of DHS's 35th anniversary, is all about Hollywood Studios. So if you're a huge Hollywood Studios fan, just make sure you subscribe before the end of the month, and your first issue will be the May DHS issue.
Awesome. I'll make sure people know where to go. Plug that in the description of this episode. But Tim, it's been so much fun hanging out with you and chatting about this subject. I'll have to have you back again soon. But thanks for
Yeah,
being on the podcast.
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to Imagination Central. As you disembark, please remember to remain fully seated until the podcast comes to a complete stop, then gather your belongings and watch your head and step as you exit. I also want to extend another big thank you to Tim for joining me on today's episode and definitely encourage you to check out and subscribe to WDW Magazine. Remember to use code SKYWAY for 15% off the shop. I say this not only because I'm a writer and contributor, but also an avid reader of this magazine. If you are a Disney fan who loves reading about Disney history, details, travel advice, and more, this subscription is worth trying in print, digital, or both. You can learn more at wdwmagazine.com. After you exit the episode, I encourage you to engage with the show by following Imagination Skyway on your favorite social media app. And if you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to share it with anyone who might enjoy our discussion today and leave us a rating or review in your favorite podcast app. If you're listening on Spotify or already following us on social media, be sure to answer our question associated with this episode, which is for you to tell me your favorite story or detail from Disney's Hollywood Studios, past or present. In addition, be sure to explore Imagination Skyway on the Patreon app or at patreon.com, where you can enjoy bonus podcast episodes and lots of content, plus a private community of listeners where we host weekly watch parties, small group video calls, and lots more fun. The offerings, terms, and conditions are subject to change depending on when you are listening to this episode. Always have to make sure to include that disclaimer depending on when you're listening to the show. Last but certainly not least, remember that achieving your dreams all begins with some self-belief, a plan of action, and perhaps a bit of inspiration. It's all possible if you're willing to put in the time, the energy, and the work to make your dreams come to life. And who knows, you might start with one idea for a Epcot Pavilion size type of idea, and that could expand into a park-sized idea or beyond. Thank you so much for riding aboard Imagination Skyway, and remember, if we can dream it, we can do it.